Riven Isles, Chapter 1, A Peace of Mind. I am grateful for the silence of the forest tonight. I am grateful for the solemnity and the stillness that it provides, as if the woodpeckers and the whippoorwills respect my grievances as much as any man might, had I any man to turn to. They hold their tongues, as I hold mine, and we sustain courteous silence for my mother's passing, for the destruction of my home. I can't help but wonder how it was that I got here. I can't help but wonder how to move forward or which direction to take. I can't help but wonder why it all happened in the first place, and what's more, why it is that in the aftermath I sit here on this rock with nothing. Nothing but my dry eyes, guilty for their lack of tears, my ash-stained shirt reeking of the fire as though it still burned, and, to my befuddlement, a dented, rusting safe from the concealed basement that had saved my miserable life. I've considered it all so thoroughly now, many times over. I have a theory as to where it began, though for now I can only hope that the why will become clear with time. I think it was a week ago that the peculiar behavior of my mother first appeared to me, and it was at my fault. There I had been, chopping wood in the forest that surrounded my mother and I's secluded cottage, half a day's ride from Amity Town. Over the years I had grown accustomed to the tedium of my chores, and the day had seemed entirely ordinary. The weather was pleasant, and the woods had a fresh, calming charm. The jays and finches chirped, and the mockingbirds repeated the tune that I whistled, the tune that they knew as well as I. I remember keenly the heat, for the gentle breeze was absorbed by the miles of thick trunks and underbrush that I had stuck myself amid. I could have filled a bucket with my sweat. Licking my lips, I could taste the salt. Just in breathing it seasoned the air. Still, I swung my axe at a young pine over and over, and bore it like a man. I knew very well that as soon as I escaped to the clearing beyond, the breeze would greet me like a lover, and I'd be soothed by its kiss. The heat of the now would be forgotten then, and it would all be the more satisfying after a hard day's work, with a chopped-up pine slung over my shoulder in a sack. When the beads of sweat on my brow started to fall over my eyes, I had to relinquish my grip on my tool and give in to a break. I ran my sleeve over my brow, exhaled a long, winded breath, and turned to pick up my leather flask. I poured my water over my face to cool my skin, drinking only a portion. As the water fell away from my ears, leaving me refreshed, I came to be aware of the tapping behind me. Clunk, clunk, clunk. I didn't turn towards the sound right away, for it was so utterly bizarre. I swore it was the sound of my unbalanced old axe, hacking away tunelessly. When I turned after uncertain hesitation, my heart nearly shot out of my chest. The axe dropped from the air just as my eyes caught the glint of its blade, and it landed with a muffled thump in the untamed grass. I left the cursed thing where it was, and made my cowardly dash for home, flask, tree, and I'll say dignity too, forgotten. Not to mention all the wood. When the breeze in the clearing hit me, I didn't even feel it. Not at all. The chills snaking up my spine had already chased the heat away, and the sweat streaming from my brow was no longer due to the climate. Once inside the cottage, I babbled what I had witnessed to my mother so quickly that she had to sit me down, drown me with water, and request of me to repeat myself in a way that was comprehensible. I say, it took me a few tries. I still tremble to think of it. despite knowing now what the phenomenon was. She had explained it to me, with reference to the war that I knew so little of, and yet I lived in. In our world, we presently have 3 types of people, the werewolves being the most recent mutation of humanity and the most controversial. Being segregated against, they stand on one side of the war. I always believed that I stood on the other, with the uncursed men and women. However, the axe in the woods said otherwise. My mother said to me, and I'll remember these words until the day I die, "You have your father's gift, Walt. What you have is a talent, but I can't tell you how important it is that you don't use it. Not now." The whole week I begged her to explain why. I didn't know what my gift was or what it meant to be gifted. I didn't know how I could harness it either, but those questions didn't matter to me then, and they're not greatly important to me now. I had used my apparent gift once, and after that unintentional, grave error, Mother's eyes wouldn't stop flicking to the windows, to the road. They didn't stop looking for danger until it came, as you know by now, a week later. And I didn't get to see it, else I think I'd be in a very different situation now. She had spotted the men down the road while I was still in bed, and hadn't even given me a glimpse. She hadn't even given me time to rub the sleep from my eyes when she wrenched me from beneath the covers and ushered me into her bedroom with the most force she had ever used against me. The force she had used made me quite fearful of a flogging, but I found myself with a much different fate. The first real wake-up call was the heavy knock at the door and the deep, gravelly voice that followed. "Oh, Mrs. Avery. Lisa, dear. Wonder if your husband were home? We'd just like a chat, if you don't mind." My eyes widened. I couldn't help but notice the forced false politeness in the guest's tone. I especially couldn't help but notice the mention of my absentee father, and the fact that this man knew my mother by name. But I had no time to question. I said to her, as she peeled the rug away from the floor beneath, I said, "Mother, if Henry, my father, has done something..." She shoved me down a hole. She whispered an apology to me from above whilst I coughed on a cloud of musty filth. "Stay here, Walter. Stay quiet. Don't you dare come out." "Mother!" The trapdoor closed, and for a moment all was pitch black. I stayed put, listening as the heavy rug thwomped back over the door, which in 16 years under this roof I'd never known of. I sat in utter blackness for only moments, heart pounding, fearing the idea of something hiding in the din. A dull blue glow slowly grew in the corner of my eye. Gradually, the light became more noticeable in the chamber. It granted me some much-needed comfort. I didn't search for the source immediately, for my attention was fixed on my mother's danger, the forced entry of our guests above made my blood run cold. I was scared, and I'm not ashamed to say so. I was scared that my mother was in trouble and that I might be too. I hadn't realized then that I may have well been the one to summon the scoundrels. The first thing they demanded was, "Where is he?" And I heard my mother tell them that he was still dead and that he had been for years, which wasn't true. He was alive, somewhere. "We caught a trace of him on the wind, Mrs. Avery." "Now, dear, don't be coy. Tell us where he is, or where the map is, and we won't have any troubles, you may lay to that." I don't know where. Her shriek was so shrill that I, even separated by the cement ceiling above me and the wood floor above that, physically recoiled. My shoulders pulled up to my ears and my knees knocked at my chest unchecked. I had heard the force of the hit that had caused the outcry. A powerful, singular beating that had led to a further gruesome crack. I imagined her leg snapped in half, or her arm, maybe. I had later seen her corpse, and had heard the doctor's word on it too, and so I know that it had been neither. "Search the place," ordered the brute above. 3 sets of footsteps pounded in different directions. One man stood above me in my mother's room. I listened to him destroying the place, flipping the bed and the dresser. Worst of all, he threw the rug, a sound of heavy material from which I could imagine the must and dust flying. I held my breath, terrified that he might find me. "He's been here. The beds are still warm," a voice bellowed from above, most likely from my bedroom. The one that stood above me left to join the other, and I exhaled a grateful prayer. The leader demanded things from my mother again, but this time he didn't try to be polite. He was anything but, and I couldn't bear it. The foul things he said I've repressed and dare not recount. I was whimpering without my realizing, as I imagined only the worst with every cry for my mother, while the other 3 men could be heard tearing down cabinets and scouring the cottage. She received a series of beatings more and told them nothing. I couldn't help but wish that she had given them what they wanted, because then they may not have taken her life. They may have just taken their map or their lead to my paw and been gone. The interrogation continued until the lesser men came up with a report of nothing, no map, and no Henry Avery. At length there was a furious roar, and one last loud crack. There was no cry of pain that time. The sound was too sudden, and too wet, and too final. A lump forced its way up my throat. I was vomiting. "Burn it down," said the leader, and he lingered no longer. 2 of his minions trailed after right away. The 3rd stayed long enough to strike a match and coax a flame. When smoke hit my nose, I realized I was alone. Alone in a cement chamber underground, on my knees in the dirt, suffocating from the reek of my own mess before me, and the fumes from my smoldering home. I grew faint as the air thinned. I passed out there, and I don't know how long for. The important thing is that I survived. I woke to the sound of lawmen pouring through the remains of the cottage. From their mutterings, it sounded bad. I'll tell you not of what I heard about it, but what I saw later, and what I know now. My house was nothing but a crumbling charcoal frame and a pile of ash, with odd items like the teapot and the teacups strewn about in places that they shouldn't have been, and my broken and charred mother was in the midst of it. Shaking and witless, I hung on to every word from the officers as they put together some sort of report. I tried to call out, but my voice croaked the first time that I tried, and I hadn't the strength to try again. "Cracked ribs," said the acclaimed Dr. Oswald. I recognized his voice before his name was spoken by the lieutenant. He'd mended a few broken bones of mine, and taken great care of my mother as well. He was a wealthy man, and liked to fancy himself in a position of law, though he wasn't, in truth. He had served in the war in his youth, and had, since his return, been a valuable doctor and mayoral figure to Amity, where his family's estate stood. wouldn't have lasted long with just the state of her ribs, but she must have taken a lot more than that. It's hard to tell with all the fire damage, but the cause of death is obvious. Her skull's been smashed in here. Very brutal. The heat took to the brain. You can see it. Poor dear. I'll stake my wig that there's some foul business about. Have you found Walter? No, sir. The boy's not here. Thank Lord. That's a good enough chance that he may be alive yet. The doctor sighed, relieved. Make sure there's a search for him. When he's found, I want him brought to my estate. It would be a terrible thing for the lad to be alone. I'd have to wonder if whoever came for Lisa might go for him next. You can be sure that this did no good for my nerves. When this group left, and the sound of their mounts' hooves receded into the distance, I slowly built up my courage to stand. I was stiff from being curled so tightly for such length, and I stumbled when I was up. For the first time, I observed my surroundings. The room was perhaps 4 meters long and 3 wide, and it was mostly bare. Its walls were covered in mold and rot. In one corner, I found the source of the blue glow that provided me with light. It was some sort of mineral, broken into pieces. Each piece glowed as brightly as the next, though the sizes varied greatly. I'd never seen such rocks before, white as the sand on the beach where the tide never reaches. Out of interest, I took a handful of smaller broken pieces and dropped them into my pajama trouser pocket. A larger piece I held in hand. I stood now, the peculiar fragments, near a pile of chains. The chains were bolted to the walls in places, and had cuffs on the end, which I could only assume were meant to hold human wrists and human ankles. It disturbed me greatly, and I don't like to think of why these bindings hid beneath my mother's home, which led me to make haste to the other end of the chamber. Here there was nothing but a hole in the wall. I almost overlooked the hole, but doubled back when I figured that it had to have been man-made, a neat square, about the size of my 2 hands together. With my rock to see by, I peered inside, and found the safe that I hold now. I don't know the combination to open it, but with the state of it, I think it wouldn't be too much trouble to force it. To speed things up, I'll be concise. There was nothing more in that room but the foul odor that drove me out of it. A triplet of corroded metal rungs supported my escape, though I swear lifting that trap door nearly broke my back. My mother's dresser had been thrown onto it. Even hollowed and halfway burnt to dust, it added a great deal of weight. From here, I shall save you the grisly details, in the hopes that you may retain your sanity and keep your pity to yourself. There was nothing of consequence left but me. As for my mother, I wouldn't wish to describe what I saw for any price. To disclose such would be obscene. For now that I have seen it, I wish to not have, and I furthermore would never wish the sight upon any other, and that is that. I left the ruins early in the evening, around half an hour after I had emerged from below the ground, and this was how I ended up where I am. I simply walked, perhaps a mile, perhaps 2, far from town and far from home. I found a large rock, quite by accident, along the side of the road, partially obscured by the thick of the woods. Weary, filthy, and utterly numb, I sat, and now, so much later, I remain, and I think of it over and over and over again.